What is activism? Welcome to Explain Like I'm 10, where we ask some small questions which have some big answers. This word activist these days has become more of a derisive term where it's like, Arey, ye to activist aadmi hai. What is this? Why is this person angry all the time? Why are activists angry all the time? What do they even contribute to society? It's just like this endless spiel of derision that is directed towards activists. So it thought it would be a good idea to get an actual one on this show and also an activist with a lot of experience. Gandhi was an activist, Ambedkar was an activist, Nelson Mandela was an activist, and so is Aakar Patel. Hello, Aakar Patel. How are you
Howdy.
doing?
Very well.
So Aakar is a human rights activist. He's an author. He was a journalist, and you still chair the Amnesty International India chapter, right?
I do.
So that is his general introduction. And joining us today also is our union leader of spectators, cousin and comedian friend Shreyas Manohar. Hello, Shreyas.
Hi, what's up?
So
Uh,
Shreyas had,
I've,
yeah,
I've, I, I mean, what you are, what you do is something that so many people around me pretend to be. So it's truly an honor and a privilege to meet an actual one in flesh.
I'm actually going to fanboy a little bit also, Akar, if you don't mind. Um, so Akar is a bit of an inspiration for me currently because my Twitter feed looks a lot like his. He has started doing very random things on Twitter, which I was like, why is he doing this? Then it all
Is
made
this what
sense because
activism is?
no, basically what Akar does now is he is very random on Twitter. And Akar, can you just describe what you do on Twitter exactly now?
I use it mostly to amuse myself and to put in whatever it is that comes to mind. Sometimes, not all the time. It is done in language that I was taught in. I went to school in Surat, and we were taught English in Gujarati, if that makes sense. Till the age of 24, I thought that the word that described large things was gignatic, and I actually used it in public. So I was corrected. And so, hey, it's quite addictive to be on social media, which is why I tried to stay away from it for a very long time. But I've discovered that it's extremely entertaining. B, I think that it can be used as a tool for activism in a way that was not possible 15 years ago. And
Hmm.
perhaps we can talk a little bit about that. But mostly, I
Yeah,
use it to amuse myself.
that's what essentially is why I think he's inspiring because so Akar does these weird tweets now. Shreyas, just to tell you,
Hmm.
Guj model best, like very weird language, very amusing language. Just I think it's a little snarky, but also very amusing. And so now my feed also looks like that. I thought that that's a great language to use. And Agar, so the reason why I also started using it is because I thought you were also resorting to some sort of absurdism to keep yourself sane in times like these. Is that something that you're doing?
That part, that's one part of it. The other part of it is that humor often tends to cut through more efficiently than anger or being very serious sometimes. And lastly, I think we have this shared middle class Indians have this shared heritage and this shared knowledge of this bad English Hindi type thing, which the rest of the world won't get. And most of the people
Yeah.
that follow me, I think on Twitter are Desis. So
Yeah.
all three things work. Yeah.
So Shreyas, so we are actually dealing with what is activism today. Now,
Yeah.
Akar has written a wonderful book called The
Oh wow.
Anarchist Cookbook. And
Yeah.
I read it and I have some notes, and the entire episode is going to be based on this essentially. Essentially, it's like a manual for people who want to start activism and how to be effective as an activist. But
I just
for
have one quick
you,
question.
yeah.
In the cookbook, how much time does it take to become an anarchist? What's the time of the recipe? Just want to ask that since you guys are
Well,
discussing language.
there are two reasons I chose that title. One is to introduce people to perhaps what happened in Spain with Orwell, and to learn the second meaning of that word, which many people might not know. Um, but sort of essentially, anybody who participates in the current narrative that goes on in her country, um, whether or not from the political aspect, can become an anarchist. I think that there is no real distinction between somebody who sees a perfectly anarchist society which is leaderless.
Hmm.
People tend to see that word in the negative, which is fine. It also has a positive connotation, and sort of, in fact, the Greek word, the Greeks used to elect, Athenians used to elect this leader called the Archon,
Hmm.
and the replacement of this came through democratic means. They had a very different democracy. Everybody would come together and vote on all the issues.
Hmm.
But it was a leaderless society because they didn't accept the idea of a king. And I think that's what the title refers to broadly.
But can you also tell us what anarchy is for you essentially right now, or why do you use
I
this
don't
title
think,
again?
to my mind, it means, uh, chaos or
Hmm.
violence. What it means is that Indians have this phrase called Maiba,
Hmm.
where a government, whether it is elected or it is imposed on you, whether it's the Raj or whether it's whatever else, is an authority that cannot be questioned. Um, the government also, the state in India also sees itself in the same way, which is why, unlike in other democracies, the police is far more willing to use violence against citizens here. It's
Hmm.
not common
Right.
in sort of other democracies that cops, that phrases like lathi charge are common here.
Yeah.
They ought
Right.
not to be.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So to my mind, the idea that the state is unquestionable is totally wrong,
Hmm.
and I think that democracy doesn't end with the vote. And I think that, um, in for many people, it's not even the major component of democracy. So if you look at the rankings that Freedom House, this body, has been putting out over the years, only 40% of what it grades a country on is voting. To
Hmm.
have a independent election commission, to have a free and fair vote, and so on. 60% is about the other parts of democratic rights: free speech, the right to assembly, the right to association. So, to my mind, the word is linked more to that aspect of
Hmm.
having a democratic space, which is not necessarily about just electing leaders, but about having an educated, free, vocal population.
Right. Shreyas, what is activism for you? Like, what do you think is activism, and how do you look at it?
I see activism as a essentially always fighting against the powers that there are, because these are usually the powers that are clamping down upon rights of people who don't have rights or who don't have a voice. And I also feel activists are, very broadly speaking, people who are fighting for a section of society or for a subset of society that doesn't have the powers or the rights that allow them to fight.
Hmm.
Very broadly speaking.
You know,
And also, someone who create an activist is someone who creates awareness also about issues that need to be known about, that need
hmm.
to be talked about. So, using educating the people into caring about an issue. Like, you don't even have to incite them. As long as people know what is happening, that will be enough to get them on the side of whatever we are fighting
Hmm.
for.
Akar, how much of that do you also relate to, or
All of it. So I
yeah?
think so. There are three different ways of looking at it. One
Hmm.
is the fact that an activist is not something similar to, let's say, pilot, carpenter, teacher, or even writer, because these are very specific things.
Hmm.
Mhm.
An activism is not defined as such, but is understood to be the taking of action towards change.
Hmm.
What could that action be? You go out and vote. You're
Right.
taking an action for a change. that is activism. You tell your mom tells you that today you have lauki for lunch and you don't want to have lauki. You try and convince her to make bhindi instead. You're taking some form of action, activism for change. What's the
Oh,
change? No lauki, bhindi.
Okay.
Uh, you might sign a petition on Facebook.
Hmm.
Activism. So activism very broad and can be any one of these things. You send a message on your building WhatsApp group that we should increase the salaries of the security people.
Hmm.
Whether or not that doesn't happen, what you're doing at that point is actually activism. You're trying to bring about change in the external world through an action of yours, whether it's a WhatsApp message, a Facebook like, talking to mom, or going out and voting. So that's one part of it. That it's not that the size of the action, the quantity, and the size of the change that is desired is not really important. All of this constitutes activism. Secondly, I would say some people would disagree with me that it's value neutral. By that I mean, if you are a set of people or you're an individual who wants to campaign against a temple, or sorry, a mosque in Ayodhya, that is also an activist. They are doing something towards it. I don't mean the violence bit, but I mean the mobilization of people bit. Generally speaking, as you said, and as you rightly pointed out, most activism tends to be against the state, because the state is the highest holder of authority, the strongest entity within a space, and the one that's most likely to harm.
right.
As an individual, my capacity to harm is limited. As the state has almost unlimited capacity to harm individuals. In fact, in many states, including India, it holds the authority, the legitimate authority to take life. Which is why
Can I just ask a quick question? If the authority, like the way you describe it, the kind of power that the authorities have and the kind of power that we as citizens have, what chance do we have? Like, are we fighting a losing battle if this is the division of powers that there is?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think we have to ask ourselves this often. My own understanding is that we look at the spectrum as having two ends. One is what I say makes zero difference. At the other end of the spectrum is whatever I say makes all of the difference. I don't think either of those is true. It lies somewhere, maybe not quite in the middle, maybe towards like makes very little difference. But even if that is true, that means that I shouldn't be completely silent on things that I think I should be speaking out about, because it does make a difference. It make a very small difference, but it makes some form of difference. Secondly, I think that human beings are creatures that respond to things like solidarity. That if I am under attack, I feel better when somebody speaks on my behalf. So it's important that somebody speak on my behalf for me. If I am only on protest about atrocities against me, that doesn't make much difference. This is the phrasing of this very great man who's now dead, called Bal Gopal, who founded the Human Rights Forum in Andhra Pradesh. Fantastic writer as well. I should be on protest against atrocities, no matter against who they are. That is when it really takes form, which is why activists, in the way that you describe them again, tend to be seen as people who fight for those who are either looked on as being downtrodden or who don't have a big voice.
Right.
I just wanted to sort of add to this one thing that, so you've written this in the book also, and I found that a little very interesting, the way you look at it. So you have this sentence which says that would you rather be a pacifist or an activist, right? Because the opposite of action is activist is passivist, which is essentially you're a passive person, you just let things happen. So would you rather be a person who wants things to happen because you are putting in an action, or would you rather be someone who is passive? I would actually say that is a very interesting way to put it, because I think then everybody is an activist in their own small way, right? Maybe they just don't know it yet. Is that the case? Or do you see like people being more passive just generally?
I don't think they see themselves as structurally being activists. I think that in the world where activists and activism happens in professional terms, such as or in organized form, like Amnesty does it, or Greenpeace does it, or PUCL would do it, or let's say the NAACP in the US would do it. That
Aakar, can
is
you also tell us a little bit about that, which is how does Amnesty work and what sort of activism it does? Also, please elaborate on that as well.
sure. So Amnesty began 60 odd years ago as a body in Europe which was against torture and the death penalty. So it's primarily a group of people who are quite academic and lawyerly. So I mostly it's about either former journalists or researchers, PhD type people doing a report on something. Let's say we did a report on AFSPA in Kashmir.
Right.
So I'll tell you what AFSPA is first. AFSPA is a law which lets, once a part of the country is designated as a disturbed area, the armed forces, meaning the paramilitaries and the army, have certain powers that they don't have in the rest of the country. What are these powers? They can hold anybody they want, children, women, young women, girls, old people, without charge, without crime, without trial. That's one part of it. And that is misused as because we are human beings. If you have absolute authority over somebody, you will use it, or you're likely to use it. The second part is that if, as a member of one of these forces, I commit a crime, let's say I kill somebody that I ought not to have killed or wrongly killed. The police investigate, somebody files an FIR.
Right.
That this happened. What happens after the FIR is that the police investigates the matter to find out whether a crime was committed, which sections have been violated. At that point, it files what is called a charge sheet. That the police files a charge sheet. At that point, and then that charge sheet is filed with the court and the trial should begin. In India, what has happened is that since 1989, which is when, since for the last 30 odd years, when AFSPA was invoked in Kashmir, every time that the Jammu and Kashmir police have filed an FIR and a charge sheet against an armed forces individual, whether it is for murder, rape, torture, kidnap, whatever it is, that file has been sent to Delhi to the Union Home Ministry and Ministry of Defense. So if it's the paramilitaries, it goes to the MHA. If it's the army, it goes to the Ministry of Defense. There is a clause in AFSPA, Section 7, that if the government finds a cause and finds that there is a problem, it can lift the immunity against the individual concerned. Amnesty's research, we took about 3 years. We found out that in 0 cases had this happened. The Kashmir police had zero, none, not even one. Kashmir police had sent charge sheets to the government 30 years. All the governments, Congress,
right,
BJP, Janata Dal, whoever. The government had not even responded to the Kashmiris. The Kashmir police, the Kashmir state. This is not just a set of sort of individuals or activists or victims or survivors. The government is responding, has not responded to the government in Kashmir.
Sure.
Parliament was told exactly this because we asked a parliamentarian to check whether this was true or not, if our report was true or not. So Amnesty usually sends the findings of the report to the government first before we actually publish it to check whether they have a response and whether we've made any errors. Government never actually replies to us. Parliament was told on January 1, 2018 that this was true. That in none of the cases of kidnap, rape, torture, murder had sanction been given to prosecute.
Okay.
So that's the kind of work that Amnesty does, like deep research. And then the lawyers are used for something called law and policy, that the language in which Amnesty publishes is very guarded. It's extremely safe, extremely focused on the law, and extremely measured in what it says. It's the diametric opposite of my Twitter feed. So
yeah.
Basic.
So it's not an opinion. Essentially, it's like a report which is factual in nature, which is very carefully also analyzed and
yeah.
Yeah.
tends to be boring as well. So 70, 80
Yeah,
pages long, and like, yeah, so it's,
understood.
yeah.
Understood. And
So that's
so
just,
go on, go
just
on.
to
Sorry.
close, Amnesty was able to get the death penalty abolished across Europe because it demonstrated through
Hmm.
data that murder rates do not fall if we hang more people, or if
Hmm.
we electrocute more people, or if we poison more people, as the US does.
Hmm.
So that once we were able to establish these two things, the states took the death penalty off the books, and it's
Hmm.
in a declining trend through the world.
Right.
What
So
what's the status in India? Like, have you tried to fight the death penalty or whatever that is
We have the
here?
problem in India is twofold. One is that the state doesn't want to engage with human rights bodies,
hmm.
generally speaking. And by state, I use the word state deliberately because whatever government is in
All
power,
gone. Yeah.
Amnesty has been here off and on for 50 years. It began around 50 years ago through George Fernandez, who was a former defense minister of India, who was an
Hmm.
amnesty activist. So then, when he passed on, and then some other people took over, and then some other people, all of these five were unrelated to each other. I've never met George, so I don't
Hmm.
know
Hmm.
what sort of amnesty was there when he was there. But the
Hmm.
principles are the same. That we
Hmm.
have to have deep research, and we have to have very measured language. So these
Hmm.
are the two
Right.
things that are sort of common. So the first reason is that the government doesn't want to engage with us. The state says no. The second is rights, generally speaking, in India tend to be um, spoken about mainly by the groups that are concerned in its violation.
Hmm.
So I tend to protest mainly when I am actually affected. I don't go on
Hmm.
what Mr. Modi calls parjivis and sort of andolanjivis. We need a little more of that. We need more people to
Right.
protest for other people rather than just people
Correct.
standing up for themselves all the
Correct.
time. But
Right.
because of this, there is a very small constituency that supports the abolition of the death penalty
Yeah.
Hmm.
because they are not on death row.
Hmm.
Why
Correct.
should I bother for somebody I don't know, and I don't have that problem. So so
Also, the
if you
optics of that aren't really acceptable to people. That, oh, you want to fight the death penalty? Like, people can't get over that only, I think.
You're right, but I'm saying that if you were to extend that even to things that have better optics, you will not be able to find too many people who will stand up in support of like others. Let's say you
Hmm.
think that
Right.
raising that making sure that once the government announces the minimum support price, farmers should get it. Okay, let's
Hmm.
say that
Hmm.
we all think it's a
Hmm.
good thing. That is not a bad thing.
Hmm.
Government also wants
Hmm.
it. If
Hmm.
75% of the farmers, according to Ashok Gulati, don't get it, how many
Hmm.
non-farmers will stand up and say that this is wrong, and this should sort of happen?
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need a larger. Sorry.
Go on, go on. Sorry, you were
No,
completing
just
something.
just 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 to repeat what I said, that we need that countries like ours need to have a larger part of the population that is interested in the problems of others, that feels empathy
Hmm.
for people, whether they are Muslims or whether they are women or whether they are transgenders or whether they are jailed. Whether three-fourths of the jail population is under trial, meaning that they've not
Hmm.
been convicted.
Hmm. You
Three-fourths
know,
of it.
Wow.
this like I wanted to go a little bit deeper into something that you said, is that the government doesn't want to engage with human rights bodies, right?
Hmm.
And this might sound like a very basic question, but I have to ask is, why don't they want to engage with human rights bodies? The reason why I ask this is because I feel I mean, of course, in mature democracies, or I don't know if it happens even now because of the world that is we are living in, but in any case, I would assume that in a mature democracy, if a citizen has rights and those rights are protected by the government, it lets the citizen operate as a citizen and also as a productive member of society, because they are also like self assured, they are confident about what they want, etc. And therefore it is in the interest of the government to sort of protect their rights. But most governments don't look at it that way. Is that a correct way to look at it? And is that why they don't want to engage with human rights bodies?
So the protection is afforded by the constitution, not by the government. The government's
They're
meant
supposed
to
to, I
parts
mean,
of the
sure,
government are meant to execute.
agreed. I mean, like but the ultimately, like if you have to look at it in a very practical way, the
Yeah,
constitution will
so basically
say something. Hmm.
the biggest violator of rights in any geography tends to be the state.
Yeah.
So the problem is, how do you get the state to hold itself to account, and what is the motivation that the state has to do this?
Hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm working in a police thana with 6 people. One of them, I can see them, picking up people without and during the sort of interrogation, slapping them around.
Hmm.
Okay, I know it's wrong because I know the law, or I
Hmm.
should know that this is wrong. But he's part of my community. I have to have lunch with him afterwards. It's highly unlikely that, and this is at the lowest level. I'm saying
Hmm.
that the higher up you go,
Hmm.
the more if you prefer relationships, if you prefer culture over constitution, which is what happens in India,
Hmm.
Hmm.
that we have diluted the constitution because through culture, and I can give you some specific sort of examples of that if you want. But because of that, we tend to overlook behavior, and the state is okay with violating laws that it is actually been elected to uphold.
Hmm.
And this is why things don't change one government from another, usually.
But then,
Of
what
course,
is the incentive for the government to actually implement the constitution as it's meant to be? Because otherwise, the
nothing.
entire system is broken, right?
No, there is no specific incentive for the state at all, except for the fact that as a community we have determined that democracy and constitutionalism is the right way of going about our lives. The
So, if there
state,
is no incentive, then it becomes a little pointless, isn't it? I mean, the entire constitution will become a little pointless.
the thing is that the word incentive is also used with another word, which is disincentive. I'm saying that this is not the classic case of a trade. There is no sort of
Hmm.
trade off here.
Hmm.
You need to just follow the rules you have, uh, and then it's fine. You don't need to be a
Hmm.
good human being. All you need
Yeah.
to do is not be a bad human being. But we are
Ah.
okay with with saying one thing. What does saying one thing
Hmm.
mean? We have Republic Day parade where we'll talk about the Constitution. We put our head to the Constitution as the Prime Minister has done. But on the other hand, we don't, neither in letter or spirit do we actually follow it.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
and that doesn't change. We need to become a better people to have a better state. Sadly,
Now,
that's
now,
the
now I understand why your book is called the Anarchist Cookbook. Essentially, that is, I think now I get it. I was thinking about this the other day, as in like last week only. This whole Hindenburg thing happened, and now when you were talking about amnesty and you creating reports for so that the government can be called out about laws that were not being implemented and sort of trying to do activism in that way. Would you say that Hindenburg is also an activist organization? Because there is definitely a personal gain there also as short sellers.
forget anything at the base level.
Hmm.
Are they taking an action? Yes. Is that action taken towards some specific change? Yes. So I'm
Hmm.
saying there is no question to my mind that the word activism in some senses is seen as good by everybody. Voting, for instance,
Hmm.
parties even want voting to become compulsory. That's how good they think it is.
Yeah.
But do they think the same thing of other bits of democracy? That should Article 19 and its freedoms,
Hmm.
free expression, the right to peaceful assembly, are, should these also become compulsory? That we should all go out on protest against all bad things all the time.
Hmm.
They would not.
Hmm.
They would say that is bad activism. So they would think of only that as being activism and not voting.
Hmm.
And that is where
But
the derision comes in from also.
I don't know if it's derision. If it were derision, then they wouldn't be so thuggish against such people.
Hmm.
My
Hmm.
The activist community, large parts of it is in jail. Large parts of it faces
Yes.
cases. So
Hmm.
that is not derision. Derision work, it would mean that you would just ignore them or laugh at them.
Hmm.
That's not what we're doing.
it's very so like I mean right now, I mean over the last few years, I think it has always been the case, but more over the last few years, this term activist is becoming very loaded also, because there is also a concerted effort to sort of make people not activists. Like, it's like it's saying that okay, so you are there as a disorganized, non-politically aligned group who is protesting against something. So you are basically bucketed into one category called anti-national, tukde tukde gang, whatever. But also this word activist is then attached to that, and then sort of the government sort of attacks the group as a whole, right? So that is where I was thinking the derision also comes from public in general. It's like people who are looking at these protests as, oh, ये तो road block कर रहे हैं, oh, ये तो free की बिरयानी खाने जा रहे हैं, तो ये कहाँ से activist हो गए?
I think that there is an idea associated with activism in some measure it's also accurate, that these are people who are not the kind of focused, get an MBA, get your car, buy a flat or whatever. These are not such people.
Yeah.
Which is true.
Yeah.
A lot of them don't care. They do what they do because of we have people who, like the guy who used to run Amnesty as the Secretary General. So Amnesty very loosely is run like the UN. Each country is separate and sovereign in the work that it does, but there is a secretariat in the UK where general policies are formed. The guy who was running it there when I joined is this man from Bangalore called Salil Shetty.
Yeah.
I am Ahmedabad, London School of Economics. When we would raise money, I would say between Salil and me, we have degrees from IIM Ahmedabad and London School of Economics. Both are his, obviously. That's the quality. He doesn't care about money. What to do? But when you see somebody like that wearing his kurta, you would have a derision for someone like that, because he's not like you, because he doesn't care about getting a bigger car.
Here is where we can take a break. After I come back, Shreyas, I have a quiz for you. Based on his book,
shit.
He has some questions which are very existential in nature, which I must ask you. So after the break, we will go into this. If you are watching this podcast on YouTube on the All About Now feed, just wanted to tell you that we also have an audio feed with another show, which is page 10. And soon we will have How to Citizen with me and Shreyas coming on the same feed. If you are listening to this on audio, consider going on YouTube also and watching this video, because Aakar is, a good-looking guy. So let's get into the break, and after the break, quiz.
Hey, it's been a special week for the IVM Podcast Network as we turn 8 this year. Listeners, thank you for being with us on this wonderful journey. Presenting to you, Club Cyrus Says, the premium tier offerings for our podcast. Club members will get exclusive Cock and Bull episodes every Monday, extended and unfiltered versions of the guest episodes, access to the Club Cyrus Says Discord server, and audio offerings such as ad-free episodes and early access to guest episodes. Also, members get to decide the topics of live episodes and get their name on the producer's slate at the end credits. On The Wire Talks, Siddharth talks to former BBC journalist Satish Jacob about the latest income tax raid conducted at their BBC office in Delhi. On The Habit Coach, Ashton helps you get a perfect answer to the question, who do we work for? On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet hosts actors Madhyama and Chayan from Netflix's hit series Class. They spoke about how they prepared for their roles and working with Ashim Ahluwalia. And on Vartalab, Akash and Naveen talk to Anshu Patni, CEO Mythoverse Studio and podcaster. They speak about parenting, home culture, and Anshu and Akash's days working together. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We have some exciting stuff for you over there. Follow us on social media via IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you like our shows, spread the word. Tell your friends and don't forget to rate and review us wherever you're listening to us. You'll also find all our shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Yono SBI, Cash Free Payments, and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you for making this possible.
Hello and welcome back to Explain Like I'm 10. I am here with Aakar Patel talking about activism, and joins me is Shreyas Manohar, comedian friend and cousin who I am about to ask some very interesting and
Yes.
intriguing questions to. Now, these questions are taken from the Anarchist Cookbook, which is written by Aakar Patel, and he sort of puts, it makes you think. Okay, so Shreyas, answer this.
Right,
While
so yeah.
walking down the street, you see a person being harassed. You decide to, one, whip out your phone and record the incident to post on social media. Two, tell the person to stop and ask the victim if they are okay. Three, find the nearest police station and report the incident. Or four, walk away.
B,
Which
the
is
second
tell the
option.
person to stop and ask the victim if they are okay.
That's the immediate action. I feel like all the other actions they have later payoffs, and then there's justice, but it's later. But I think the B option is the one that the immediate one that will really.
Okay. Akar, any insight on that? Is that the correct
I
thing to
think
do?
that I think that there is no one correct thing to do,
Hmm.
except for the fact that one ought to consider not walking away. It could be that
Hmm.
you are under threat. You're with somebody who's vulnerable. You yourself might actually be vulnerable. So walking away might be an option
Hmm.
for you. But I would say that this tells us about the various kinds of people we are and what it is that how it is that we can become activists ourselves. There is
Hmm.
really I have a friend who no longer is a friend of mine because he stopped talking to me. Uh,
Right.
he used to be a reporter in the Times of India,
Hmm.
and I won't take his name, but if you Google the incident, you will know what it is that I'm talking about. 20 years ago, he was on a train, uh, and this we know this because he wrote a story about it the next day.
Hmm.
And he and I would take the late train back um, from South Bombay
Hmm.
to the western suburbs. I was not with him that night. He and some other passengers on that local saw and heard this man who was sexually assaulting this girl,
Hmm.
and it happened over a period of time, and then when their stations came, they just got off.
Hmm.
He wrote about it.
Okay.
I so maybe he felt vulnerable. Maybe he felt that he ought not. Maybe he just felt weird that it can't be me. Lots of times when you're in the audience, you don't want to be the one who's the first person to clap because
Yeah.
you don't know whether there's a right person to do that and so on. Maybe it was just that, I don't know.
Yeah.
But the idea that the external world is completely a different thing that you don't want to engage with, or you want to
Hmm.
engage with it only as a sort of entertainment for you and your social media feed. To my mind, that is slightly problematic.
Yeah.
The
Right.
world
So in this
becomes
case, Akar, then ideally, like, so this reporter, not friend of yours, is essentially watching this incident happening, right? Which is
not looking away, just hearing it. At some point, you don't. People didn't. I don't know whether he kept staring or I. To the best of my recollection, he turned his face away.
but then he wrote about it the next day and sort of also told the world that this happened.
Yeah,
So is he taking
But
action
what are
in
you
his own
doing?
way then?
But the action isn't changing the actual problem that was happening there when you had a chance to when you were there, right?
That is often the criticism that is levied against journalists,
to
right?
be
Where
fair,
you're watching an incident and reporting on it, not doing anything about it.
when he wrote about it, he didn't. He wrote about it with a sense of contrition that he should have done
Oh,
something about it but couldn't or didn't.
Right.
okay.
Is he? Yeah. Is he taking an action against the act? No,
Hmm.
obviously not, because the that the problem began and sort of ended while he was there.
Hmm.
It was an action in the general sense of trying to alert people to the fact that these things happen and this is what I didn't do and this is perhaps what I ought to have done.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Ought to have done. Right. Got it. This. Sorry, just to push you a little bit on this more. This is where the job of a journalist is also questioned. Like this criticism came against Barkha Dutt, for example, right? When she was doing that whole tour during the lockdown, right, where she was meeting all these laborers who were walking a long distance, wherever they were going from one place to the other. A lot of people said कि तुम कैमरा लेके बस उनका ये ले रहे हो, उनको गाड़ी में बिठा के लेके क्यों नहीं जाते, right? Why aren't you like ferrying them around while you are also reporting on this? What is your view on that in general? What is her job on the ground there?
That's not a valid criticism. If you have a lakh people on the road that you can see who are walking, is it better if you, as somebody who has millions of followers, tells the world that this is happening to put pressure on the state to do something, or to put 5 people in your car and take them away?
Right.
I would say definitely the former. There is, it's not really even a debate. Yeah, it's just nonsense.
The
other interesting question is whether they are activists. And the thing is that journalism is actually activism. I'll tell you how. Newspapers have two general parts to them. One is what is called the news pages. The other is what is called the opinion pages. The news pages report stories. What are the stories? Let's say not enough vaccines in this city, or teachers are not showing up in government schools, or Manrega dues are not being given to workers. Okay, this kind of story. What are the opinion pages doing? They are saying this should happen. What has happened is wrong. That the state should be more effective in bringing the teachers to school. That learning outcomes have to be improved. That Manrega dues have to be paid on time.
Right.
They are not doing the third thing, which is taking a dharna outside the government's office and saying, "Karo isko jaldi."
Right.
But there is no difference between the two. It's only the method that activism is seen purely as that third thing. That you go physically to there and say, but that's not true. That's not even how Amnesty functions. Amnesty also has research. Amnesty also has reports. But we also have campaigning. I think the fact is that we tend to fuse campaigning and activism fully, while leaving aside those bits that many people do, including all of the media, or all of the media should.
Like, interestingly enough, now that you mention is RTI activists is exactly what they do, right? Which is basically bringing out information so that something can happen or government can be held accountable about, whatever they are doing, etc. And in your book also, I think you have given that, which is essentially the primary job of an activist is to gather information and also communicate it properly in a strategic way. Right? And I think the campaign part comes after that. Maybe that is a good way to look at a journalist also then.
Yeah. One should have a strong campaign only on issues that one is very clear about and knows things about and has thought them through. It makes very little sense to be able to be passionate about something you haven't fully considered. You don't know the other side, for instance.
Right.
But I'm saying that research tends to be good because it makes you look at the other side. Once you start writing stuff, it is impossible for you to ignore the blank space around the words that you have written. You will have to look at the other. You're forced to think about the other side.
Right.
To my mind, I think the gathering of evidence and research is the most important part of campaigning, but it's also the beginning. It's the first part.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, unless you know the issue that you are also trying to change or why you are trying to change it, maybe it's also pointless then after that. Like, I mean, if you don't have that clarity, how will you go about it? Shreyas, okay, I have one more question for you. Then I have to ask a few more, go to another subject. But, okay, so at a party, you hear some comments made by a friend that you feel are inappropriate. What do you do? One, confront the microaggressions with harsh language. 2. Initiate a conversation to understand your friend's perspective. 3. Use this as an opportunity to educate your friend. And 4. Brush aside this painful interaction.
B again.
Which is initiate
Because
a
I think instead of
conversation
just
to understand your friend's perspective.
correct, it might be wrong, but just to see that where it is coming from and why it is wrong could be
Hmm.
a way to really have a conversation where I can tell the friend that why you shouldn't say whatever was said.
This is actually a very interesting question that you put in, Aakar, and I feel like we need to also address this a little bit. Is it worth having a conversation with a bigot, for example? This is a big question that is being asked nowadays. Okay, should I just understand, say my dad is a bigot or whoever, my uncle is a bigot, should I talk to them and understand their perspective when I know that that perspective is A, wrong, B, evil to a large extent, and C, can cause some real harm if it is effected on? Is it worth doing what Shreyas said?
I think it is. I think most people at Amnesty would do what he did. I would obviously go and pick a fight. But okay, so my dad's a bigot.
Hmm.
I don't agree with him on the big things.
Hmm.
Okay, so that is the starting point. Do both of us agree that it's 1 o'clock and it's going and the budget is today? Yes.
Hmm.
Do both of us like chana ki dal? Yeah. I'm saying that you need to narrow the space between the person that you have a disagreement with. How do you do that? You need to find that space and be able to use that space.
Hmm.
All activism assumes that even if there are people at the extremes, one is my extreme, one is my dad's extreme, there is something in the middle. There can't be nothing in the middle.
Right.
There are some people who mostly agree with him, but sort of agree with me on some things, or mostly agree with me and sort of agree with him on some things. How do you pull those people towards you?
Hmm.
What are the things that you bring to pull them more towards you and farther away from him? That's what you need to look at.
Can
Once
it happen the
that
other way around also then?
it
Where
can happen the
your
other way
dad
around.
is pulling you towards.
Absolutely. There
Yeah.
is nothing there. Everybody has agency.
Hmm.
Usually, activism happens against the state, but the VHP is an activist in favor of the state
Yes.
now, these days,
Yes.
since 24. So, it does not preclude that you don't get influenced either. Absolutely true.
Hmm.
But usually, activists tend to be better informed because they do that evidence gathering first, and the basis on which they're saying stuff is sound in law. That's why we have a lot of academics and PhDs and lawyers within groups like Amnesty.
Then I would say, so like this happens often. I've seen this happening often, like news channels sort of report on these incidents of theater violence and whatever. Like Bajrang Dal activists go and protest, quote unquote, in but essentially they are indulging in violence. um
Yes,
I wouldn't consider them as activists. I would say that they're goons.
there is no sacred definition of sort of activism. So that is one reason why you can sort of get away by calling them activists. Which is why I said at the beginning that, unlike pilot and teacher and doctor and surgeon and writer, activist is not really as specific as that. It's quite broad and open.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I have like the last bit that I wanted to address was about expectations versus reality. You have a big chapter on this, which is expectations versus reality. I feel like one thing that activists do try to do, and I have done this. I mean, I'm completely being honest here. Shreyas knows this also. I've spoken to him about this. So I used to work in Parliament, and I saw all the broken systems around Parliament. Like essentially the anti-defection law, or like a bunch of other things that are happening in Parliament. Like, for example, the number of minutes that you get to speak is based on your party strength. So which means that I worked with very small party MPs, so we barely got any time, whereas BJP is talking for like an hour and a half, we got like 1.5 minutes. There are certain very big problems in Parliament, not taking private members' bill seriously, right? So but then what happened is, over a period of time, I tried to do some activism also in my own way, which is A, inform people about the whole broken system, B, try to make a change. So we actually tried to file a private members bill and try to get it passed, like to reform defamation. We tried to have like conversations about anti-defection with people. We tried to see if we can actually see if there is a way to change that law. There isn't, apparently. But my expectations back then were huge, because I was working with MPs. They are kind of powerful people. They are with some parties and kind of powerful. I'm quoting that. But my expectations were huge. But the reality was that in the 7 years that I worked in Parliament, all I was able to do was build, realistically, help build a 16-kilometer road in Odisha somewhere, and also like help draft a legislation which turned bamboo from a from a tree to a grass, so that it doesn't count as deforestation. In 7 years, that's all I did. So how do we measure this, and how do we not get depressed while doing activism?
Well, so I think human beings should be more aware of the scale of the universe that we live in.
Okay.
I'm born, I was educated, I wrote books, or I formed a company, I floated an IPO, I gave jobs to a lakh people, uh, I had many grandkids. Um, I became prime minister. I fought wars with neighboring countries and conquered them, and I died. In the scope of the universe, all of this is nothing. It doesn't mean anything.
Hmm.
For the individual, our viewpoint tends to be so limited to spans that don't make sense in universal time.
Hmm.
um, we should understand that what we are capable of achieving in terms of change is limited because of the fact that we are a very small part of something very big.
Hmm.
But why should you do that work in those 7 years? Because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Also, change usually comes because of a shift, and these shifts are not possible if large numbers of people work on them for a large length of time.
Hmm.
The Indian National Congress fought for independence for decades. You're talking of groups that were not demonized like they are today. They had the
Hmm.
freedom to mobilize. Sometimes they got shot, like they were
Hmm.
in Jallianwala Bagh. But for the
Jallianwala Bagh,
most
yeah.
part, if all those photos of Gandhi sitting on the stage with a microphone above him are not from after 1947. They're before
Hmm.
1947.
Hmm. Hmm.
He's being allowed by the British to go around the country mobilizing people in large
Hmm.
numbers.
Hmm.
It still took them decades. It took them years, even after the British said, "Acha, bhai, ja rahe hum," because at some point, colonialism became a bad idea. After the Second World War, there's the Atlantic Charter, where the US and the UK agreed that what is called the
Hmm.
right to self-determination would be given to all nations,
Hmm.
and so on. So, in any case, 1947 would have happened.
Hmm.
But to the congressmen in 1901, when Gandhi comes from South Africa in 1915, 32 years later, he gets independence. And he's already a big star by then. By the
Yeah.
1915, he comes on the back of his famous campaign in South Africa. So he's already a big name in Bombay.
Right.
Jinnah goes to receive him. Lokmanya Tilak is in awe of him and so on. So it still takes him 32 years. So I'm saying that
Hmm.
we should not consider the fact that we are small, which we are. Like look around you. There's a story called Nightfall. I think it's by Arthur C. Clarke. It's
Hmm.
about this planet of people, this planet that has two suns. But because of those two suns, they never have night. The
Right.
sun is always somewhere or the other. Because they never have
Hmm.
night, they don't know what the universe is or how big it is or how small they are. One day, because of an eclipse, there is a period of brief, period of nightfall. They look at the stars and they
Wow.
all go mad. They go nuts
Right.
because it dawns on them, okay, yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So A, we should be modest in what we are and who we are. B, we should consider the fact that we help push change through being part of larger things like movements, groups,
Hmm.
and so on.
It's like Plato's cave, essentially. Like the whole Plato's cave allegory is also that where the guy goes out and sees like
Except,
what he's.
yeah,
Shreyas, I just had one last question for you.
Hmm.
If you had to be an activist and if you had to do some activism, is there a particular subject that you would do it on, and if is there a particular way you would go about it? Have you thought about this?
Um, I have not.
You have
I have
not.
not. No.
Like in your field of comedy, let's say, do you see something wrong happening which you would like to change? And would you be an activist in that front?
I mean, I would want more space time for myself. That's one cause
Yeah.
that I would like to
Yeah.
let go.
Activism,
But again,
probably.
like you said, I can't think beyond myself. I tried to, I couldn't, but when I think about myself, I already have like, okay, these two things, I can get behind that.
is there an ideal length of time that you think is like that you can deliver the goods and then you have to go, otherwise it becomes too long and then it starts to taper off and flatten?
with like time on stage,
Yeah,
yeah, it depends on how much material you have also.
but
So
it's the
if
same
you,
material being sort of rotated in a, a period, right? Like in any 6 month period, you'll have maybe one or two or maybe three sets that you have.
correct. But like
And
if it's an hour long, if it's an hour long show, then it's those many jokes. If it's 20 minutes,
we heard
also
last week,
stage
we
time.
heard this guy. Sorry.
Uh-huh. What
Last
did you
week we
hear?
heard this guy called Anuva Pal in Bangalore, 60-minute
Yes.
session.
Yeah.
But it was
Did he, what
tense
did you
and it
think?
was fantastic throughout. He was very good.
Yeah,
So
amazing.
from what I understand, Shreyas, correct me if I'm wrong, but what comedians do essentially is that of course they write like a bunch of jokes, they go and do open mics, keep trying them, keep perfecting them, see how much reaction and laughs they get until they have like an hour worth of material which is full of like jokes which have worked essentially,
That are
and that is what they
perfect
keep
according to
regurgitating
you. Yeah.
for a while. Then they'd go on a tour, then they put out YouTube videos, then that is done. Then those jokes are done. They're out there. Then the next cycle begins. Is that how it works?
Correct. Pretty much. Like, I mean, people who are much bigger players, they go out with specials, but people who are much smaller, they come out with a video first. Then that gets them enough of an audience to shoot again, then shoot an hour. So the order
Hmm.
varies, but yeah, that's pretty much the.
What I noticed about Anuva Pal was that a lot of his material was recycled, but it had been made, changed to tweaked to make it more newsy. So it's the same joke, but the characters had changed
Correct.
to make it more current.
True.
Correct. Yeah, it has to seem contemporary, even though the joke has been written years
Correct.
ago.
Yeah.
Also depends on the audience, I'm guessing. Like, who you are addressing and what kind of audience you're talking
Yeah,
to.
I'm
Maybe that
guessing
also.
people in that audience are people who read newspapers and like watch the news and everything. So he also has that.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
his mind. Shreyas, if you had to like, I just a very sort of a difficult question before we end. We know that comedians essentially are living in fear right now, which is essentially going on stage and not being able to talk about things that they want to talk about, especially after
Yeah,
the AIB thing that happened, etc. Uh,
yeah.
do you think any comedian is an activist today? And what do you think about that?
No, I don't think any comedian is an activist, really. I think there are some comedians who might pretend that they are activists, but uh, actually speaking, I don't know if, any good comic will also call themselves an activist. It might be
Hmm.
possible that because of their jokes, there is impact happening, but that impact is not intentional. Like the main purpose has to be getting a laugh, and
Hmm.
everything else is just tertiary, I feel.
Akar, would you agree that comedians are activists and can be activists?
I think that the circumstances are different. If you
Hmm.
are in public, you are more vulnerable than somebody who's not.
Yes.
Huh.
If you And I think that that brings more caution into what it is that you can say. I think that
Hmm.
also if the period that you're living in is intolerant to things being said in public, the human being is rational. I'm saying that there is no sense in deliberately getting yourself into trouble by trying to push a material that you think is problematic. The issue is that comedy can come only out of ridicule of the powerful, not of the weak.
Yes.
Correct.
So that is the reason why kings don't like, you know, comedians.
Yes,
And
yeah.
the only comic that the king would tolerate was the court jester, who would make fun within the court, either of the king or whatever else, but nothing else was actually allowed. So it was what is called sanctioned comedy, you know,
I
a
think
command.
most of the comedy world is court gestures more than
So yeah,
comedy.
because the
When it
dogs are going on behind me.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
like when it comes
No,
to the
so
context of this,
this is like Pakistan in the 80s. So we have gone back to what Pakistan was in the 80s, where both on the side of cinema and on the side of live performance, there was a self censorship that people had because they knew that trouble was not too far. And we have regressed as a nation in that sense. You could have spoken things much more openly 15 years ago than you
for sure.
can now. That is a fact. And the idea that comedians are not seen as ridiculing power more comes out of the fact that they know this and they recognize the kind of
Correct.
trouble that they can get in if they do it.
Yeah.
Shreyas, you were saying that most comedians are currently court jesters?
That's what I was saying. That in the context of like when you talk about fighting the state and everything, I think they're court gestures in the fact in the and what I mean by that is that they are playing within whatever the field has been set by the state. No one
Generally
is really
speaking,
going out of it radically. Huh?
generally speaking, creative art forms, the people who are in them don't tend to come from what is called the right. They
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah, they
Because
don't.
it's not the kind of environment that engenders this kind of creativity.
Correct.
Which is why
But
I think the
I'm
point
also
is.
treating apolitical as right wing. Like when you don't talk about politics.
I know what you're absolutely right. I'm saying that if like writers, if you're ignoring the material that is around you and writing about something else, that's just nonsense.
Yeah.
Like
Correct.
you're living through a particular time. Your work has to reflect that time.
Like
Absolutely.
Puneet Pania's perpetual complaint is this, that comedians get stage time and they don't go and talk about things that matter. When you have a stage and a mic, you should talk about things that matter,
What about
not
Kamra?
about.
Do you guys think that he qualifies as somebody who speaks out?
I feel like I would
Uh,
actually consider Kamra as a little bit of an activist also.
Me too.
He does. I feel like, okay. So my definition of an activist would also be, in that case, someone who sort of pushes the boundary so that there are other people who also start following. Which is essentially if he's challenging authority in whatever way he does, like cracking jokes, doing whatever. There will be like 3-4 other people is like, "Arey, ye to kar raha hai, to maybe we can also do it," and then 3-4 other people will do it. Then 3-4 other people will do it. That is
And
how maybe the thing I'm looking at.
also, Meghnad, the same thing can be said more openly on Facebook and YouTube by me or by you or by somebody else.
Yes,
It is
yes, yes.
genuinely good use of Article 19. You know that pushing of it. In the US, people might not know that the protection of free speech came out of the cases filed against and the cases fought by Penthouse and Playboy.
Oh,
Obscenity for decades defined what the cusp of what the breaking point of free speech was, and they are the ones who were always in court trying to make sure that the space was opened up. Pornography
Right.
did it, not
Right.
the liberal left and not the whoever else.
Shreyas, do you think what, like, same question which Aakar asked about Kunal Kamra? What are your views on that?
love Kamra, love his comedy. I also think it is definitely creating impact. I recently saw him do a show in front of 400 people in Nagpur last week. Insane. Lots of political stuff. It was killing throughout. People couldn't stop standing and laughing in the middle of the joke. But what I'm saying is that he can't think of himself as an activist, nor does he think of himself as an activist, even though the effect or the impact of the comedy does some activism. The day he thinks of himself as an activist, I think it comes in the way of your comedy. And thankfully,
True.
luckily, fortunately, he doesn't also. Like,
Very
he's
true.
not like, I'm going to create a change with my comedy. He's like, I am just finding humor in what I'm seeing. And of
Yeah.
course, there's a focus, but he's not like I'm changing the world, which is great, which like shouldn't be the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. No,
not
I
to me.
think that the audience wants to feel connected to the performer and not feel that they are some very different from them. I
Hmm.
think,
Correct. Correct.
yeah, it, it would be bad for his work if he were to be identified as being an activist, or he would sort of identify as an activist and say that I'm doing all this stuff
Correct.
for social change.
Yeah.
The only way
He's
for
your friend you are hanging out with who's like bitching about what's happening, what's in the newspaper. I feel that's the angle at
It's
which you
fine to
bring
bring
that.
in the content, by the way. It's just not fine for the audience to think that you're doing this. They've
Correct.
come
yeah.
there for a laugh. They should get their laugh.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
that's the
Which
thing,
they
right?
do.
Like, so Kamra, the only way Kamra can earn money right now is through ticket sales by selling out an auditorium or whatever, wherever he can do
Yeah.
shows. Also, doing shows will be difficult for him because the auditorium might not be comfortable hosting him or whatever.
True. True,
That
true.
is one perpetual problem with activism, also, right? Which is
Yes.
essentially because you're challenging power, how do you survive? Uh,
We had we had a press conference in Srinagar, 2018 or 2019. There's news of this on the net. Um, in a hotel, the police, they sent two vans to stop me from leaving the place I was in to go to the place that we were going to have the press conference. Private place where we had called media, they did not want us to have it.
oh,
It's very difficult, and people don't know how tough it is because most people don't do it themselves. That they don't
yeah.
know how undemocratic India has become in so many ways that it hadn't been before. It's quite tough and quite a stifling. Half of the groups that we used to have on civil society is in jail.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
We used to have these meetings, whether online or offline. Half those names are they can't reply because they're not there. Half the chairs are empty.
Shit.
Yeah.
That's scary though.
Okay.
That's very scary.
I'm saying that these
I
people, of course, nobody wants to be in jail. But if you ask them today, if you ask, Umar Khalid, would you take back what you said? He would say no.
Huh. True.
This is
True.
who they are.
Yeah.
hmm.
Can't change who you are.
Also, you don't want. I'm saying that there is a certain duplicity, and this is not necessarily a bad thing in people who lead these middle class professional lives,
Hmm.
where you feel that you should, if you feel strongly about something, don't say it on Facebook because it'll get your job into trouble.
Hmm.
That your boss might
Uh-huh.
find out and he might call, like, say, boss, you take this post down or I'll, like, fire you.
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't have that problem, right? Activists don't have that problem.
Yeah,
Correct.
of course. They can say whatever they want because that is who they are. And that is
That is
what is also expected of them from the world. Yeah.
by
Uh,
themselves also. By the world or not, I
by
don't think they
themselves.
would
Yeah.
really care about that.
Yeah. Shreyas, you were saying something and then we'll end.
Yeah, I was just saying that let's imagine a world in which we don't have the problems that we do right now in this nation. As an activist, would you feel like there's nothing to do? Like when a country solves all its problems, what do activists do? Or that's a very
No country solves all problems,
hypothetical.
which is just a very banal thing to say. But the problems
Right.
of human beings are created by human beings,
Hmm.
Correct.
which is why no country will ever have no, because all countries will always have people. And when you have people,
Yeah.
you will always have an issue. Mom will always make
Correct.
Loki at some point.
Right.
Right.
Right. You gotta
Will
fight for the
always be.
bindi.
Yeah.
That's a great point to end this at. I would highly recommend everyone to buy Aakar's book. I feel like it's a great book. Thank you so much for writing this, Aakar. It's actually a very easy read. I must also say that there are illustrations by Pen Pencil Draw, a cartoonist who also I really like his work on. He posts it on Twitter, etc. And follow him. Please
How do
do
you know
follow
it's
him.
Seki?
Again, yeah, true, sorry, their work I really like, and I don't know who it is, and you have chosen to keep them anonymous here also, which is great. Please do consider getting this book. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Aakar. Anything else that you want to plug, and where can people follow you?
I'm on Twitter, fairly easy to find, AAKARPATEL. This book, unfortunately, is not been uploaded for free on LibGen, but my other books are. You can You don't have to buy them. You can just download and read them for free if you would like. On libgen.rs, you can search for my name, and you'll
Oh,
find
nice.
what I've
I've
written.
never heard that as a pitch from a book author. That download it for free. That's nice.
I'd rather be read than bought.
That's
Wow.
true. That's true.
This is like a freemium model, no? Like if you read it and you like it, then ठीक है थोड़ा सा पैसा दे देना कभी तो भी, you know, whatever. Like that's a good way to look at it. Actually, I should do this also. Why don't I do this? Thank you, Aakar. One more thing to copy. Shreyas, do you have anything to plug, and where can people follow you?
None, I don't know when this show is coming out, so just follow me on my Instagram, Shreyas_Manohar. Whenever I'm doing a show, drop by. And yeah, that's that. How to Citizen Season 2 is coming soon. Just watch that whenever it comes.
Yes. On this same feed where you will be watching this show is where How to Citizen will also drop. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for doing this, Aakar. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I will see you next time, next week. Please listen and watch All About Now. For our other shows, also subscribe to YouTube and also follow our audio feeds, and please leave a rating wherever possible. Promote this show so that more people can hear it, and so that more people know what is up in the world in general. Thank you so much. See you next week.